thanks for joining us on this sad and auspicious day, for it is our last submission for EDF 5705. Try and hold the tears intense as we discuss 4 more rousing articles for you today.
In this article, they discussed the effects on the environment and on pretty much everything of a single cup of coffee. And they went through each separate piece and described the ecological effects, where the materials came from, and the effects that came from it. And further on in the article, there was a second one about rampant consumerism and advertising, and the effects that it has on our children, and basically talks about hyper-consumerism. This fit really well with one of our previous articles we discussed, the Lyman article. It touches on it, they discuss advertising and the way they try to create hyper-consumerism. They found that 65% of 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders had TV in their bedrooms, and half of those had cable TV. This in a school where over 70% of the students receive free or reduced price lunches. Where are our priorities when we're doing this? Like, why does everyone have this TV when they can't afford their lunch? And so it was just really interesting to see the effects of a single cup of coffee, what it has on our environment, and the second part, the effects of consumerism on our children, on students.
So implications for teaching?
Your previous resource actually was a really good one, where you teach children about advertising.
The D. Madigan video?
That's the one.
Yeah.
I feel that we just need to make them aware. Don't, be aware of what our effects are on the environment and on the world around us, and be aware that on TV, people want you to buy stuff. Pokemon is a TV show that was based after they came out with the game.
Yeah.
It was made to sell Pokemon products.
The branding is a powerful force. I was actually listening to the most recent episode of the Freakonomics podcast this morning on the way to uni, and the difference between store-bought, like home brand aspirin and pharmacy like CVS brand aspirin in the US, that's a five times the price for the brand. Yet it's preferred with most people, despite having absolutely no chemical differences in it. So yeah, I think, Joey, this article would be valuable to use as a launching pad to teach students about branding, because as that D. Madigan video said, kids are exposed to 5,000 images of advertising per day. And I imagine if 2/3 of your students have TVs in their room, that number would be even higher.
Yes.
The article dealt with teachers making an integrated unit of work about the subject of child labour. So in this unit, she made students bring in their t-shirts and products, and then they sort of mapped out where they all came from. And then she sort of went into them writing persuasive letters to people, and then they had to write down their chores at home. It was geography, maths. They had a shop, I think. There is some excellent activities in there, and it seems like a good way to make students aware of different mathematical concepts, and the students were engaged with it because they realised that there was kids working in these other countries. But as far as the subject matter goes, I was a bit, I couldn't really gravitate towards it. I felt like it was almost a little bit too heavy.
Do you think it would be more suitable to a higher grade, or do you just think perhaps early high school would be better?
Early high school, I think.
Yeah. I think that reading it, it just seems something that they need to be a bit more mature to really take away what they have.
To understand the concept of child labour. It's not just a plain shop.
The kids did make personal connections, and they did the lessons well, which is what you want out of an integrated unit.
Yeah.
So I was impressed with that, but the subject matter was a bit dicey for me.
A student with his first job.
Yeah.
Having that experience versus, imagine doing what you're doing now, except in unsafe conditions for a fraction of what you're making, and not having a choice about whether or not that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. I am certain that the quality of my students' work and their commitment to struggling through difficult material was born not just out of a dedication to learning, but from a meaningful, provocative content of a child labour.
So less about the content perhaps and more about the learning that's happening.
Yeah. But I mean, she's saying in this that the content really did make
Bring
them...
it home.
they were accountable to the content.
Andrew, do you think that like maybe tweaking it a bit, maybe taking it not so much focusing on such like child labor, but on people less fortunate than ourselves.
So Witt's article also deals with an integrated unit about child labour, but in the context of work in general. So they involved parents, community leaders, union members, and the wider community. So it goes relates very closely to the Pressic article from the first week about creating a community in the context of an integrated unit. So with child labour, they couched it by first looking at the evolution of workers' rights in the US. So discussing, you know, the emergence of the middle class through trade unions and through greater rights for, you know, between the haves and the have-nots. And I thought that was a really elegant way of broaching what we've agreed is a pretty sensitive topic.
Yep.
This was aimed at at sort of the upper grades, which I think is the appropriate sort of level. Students also interviewed their parents about their own jobs, which is sort of a valuable way of understanding what their parents do, because they may not have these discussions outside the school. I think parents are probably a largely untapped resource when it comes to these kind of inquiry units, so it was good to see the teacher leveraging that knowledge. You know.
Yeah.
Quite a long one. It refers to the conversation that parents were having when this unit was first suggested as an idea. So this program was objected to by middle-class parents who commented that the poorer families are not going to want the fact that they're a housekeeper or a janitor plastered all over the walls. As it turns out, the opposite was true. Parents with lower status jobs greatly appreciated both the recognition they received and the open discussion of issues of equity in the work world. So I think too often in teaching, when we're teaching something discrete like maths or spelling and that sort of thing, it's not really couched in the real world. And I think this unit is a superb example of teaching students within the curriculum, but also giving them that broader perspective of the community.
Where one of the solutions to the Tenorio article was about trying to create some kind of community within teachers, sharing ideas. It was basically about the fact that everything is being taught to the child. So like, it's not just your direct, explicit curriculum, it's implicit, everything else. And yeah, so she says that new teachers might struggle to be able to understand that concept, and that the best way to arm yourself is just to learn who your students are, and yeah, build that kind of sense of community within the classroom.
So in terms of building relationships with students, I'm reminded of the John Hattie study from that we discussed last semester, and the single greatest factor that influenced positive student outcomes was forming rich relationships between teachers and students. I believe it was a grade and a half. It made a grade and a half of difference in terms of learning outcomes.
Yeah, it also goes on to say about how you've really, as the teacher, you have to think of what's best for the child.
What I'm noticing this semester is that people are talking about teaching, and we've only been on a few placements, and they're like, in my class, in this class, in that, my placement here and here. And it's like, I feel like that's sort of maybe jumping the gun a little bit, because once you get into your own classroom, you set the rules, you set the structures, and you will notice the differences between students.
Definitely.
And like the class should be based on mutual respect. And a lot of these, not mine so much, but we kind of touch on the fact that like gradual release of responsibility is another part of it, and they're kind of all in there. Integrated units typically have that. What you were saying comes into that. So it's all about fostering a classroom of respect, and learn who the kids are and work with them. Work with them. Don't teach at them.
So I think that's important, especially for diverse learners, to keep that in mind.
Yeah, no, I don't think, how on earth you're supposed to teach effectively to diverse learners without understanding who they are, where they've come from, what their interests are, where their strengths lie.
Yeah.
You know, it's impossible. Yeah. So yeah, I really like that.
Locate the cultures, the history of the community around your school. Who are the local heroes? What groups are working for justice in your school's neighbourhood? Who are your allies? Who can your students research? The media puts forward athletes and movie stars as contemporary heroes. Where can they find alternative models in your community?
Love it.
Be worth as a teacher to brainstorm the people that you think the kids would like to look up to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like, when I was a kid, Arnold Schwarzenegger was my hero.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm the only one. I loved it. I loved it when I was young. It was full of the action, but
Yeah.
he's not a very good role model,
No.
is what I'm trying
Yeah,
to say.
no, he's
If I knew about Nelson Mandela and understood the situations, that guy's a way better hero.
Absolutely.
And if you can find that within your own community, then that's awesome, because all the kids, they're just going to be,
Starry-eyed.
starry-eyed. They're going to take so much from that local person who is accessible, like Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's not accessible.
Exactly going to say, if accessible, you could have, if it's a local community leader, you could have it in the classroom, presenting every now and then.
I think it's important for them to have a role model, but it's also important for them to maybe find that in themselves.
For my additional resource in regards to the article I read about consumerism, I found a website called www.newdream.com, the Center for a New American Dream, More of What Matters. The part that I really find is applicable for us is that they have a section called Beyond Consumerism, and they just have everything.
Mine is the International Baccalaureate website with a specific focus on the primary years program. This is a program that's run in primary schools, and they have a dedicated unit of inquiry each month. So they could be, who are we, sharing the planet, how the world works, how we express ourselves, and they will pick something like recycling, and then just dedicate, there's a dedicated hour of every day to that.
I've got 2 additional resources today. So in the interest of talking to students about workers' rights and that sort of thing, I've got the Australian Government website that has a brief outline of the Eureka Stockade, which for Australia was a massive watershed moment in the fight for equal rights among workers, and the sort of primer for teachers so that they know the events. Again, like you said with child labour, you could perhaps, it was quite violent, so you could perhaps couch it, be a bit more sensible with it and not quite as graphic, but my second one is a YouTube video I stumbled across last week called A Brief History of Unions. It's a little cartoon. It is in the US, so not everything's directly applicable, but it only goes for a minute and a half. Nice little jolt, as you would say, to whack up on the smartboard before a lesson.
Alright, so I've got 2 resources for this week. The first of which is the National Museum of Australia. They've got a website, and it's got all resources for primary teachers on Australian history. And the next resource that I've got is the website for the Australian Immigration Museum, or the Melbourne Immigration Museum in the city. And that kind of has info sheets and projects that kids can do, and talks about immigration, and it's that kind of, as we were talking about Australian history, it's the current Australian migration of people, like refugees from anywhere to the First Fleet. We're all immigrated here, apart from the First Fleet.
So the time has come to say goodbye to the Curriculum Resource Project. So again, we're trying to hold back our tears. So we want to thank you, Nathan, and anyone else who's watching for watching, I suppose. But a more deep thank you to you, Nathan, for designing what we all agree to be a really excellent assessment. We've all learned absolutely tons throughout these last 5 weeks. And it's information that we will directly be able to use as teachers.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So until next time, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.